this year's summit focused on the pandemic, vaccine inequity, issues around proliferation of small arms in Africa, climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals in particular. Now, SDGs are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. But to talk about the role played by Africa in this summit and the way forward, we are now joined via Zoom by African Affairs analyst, Advocate Sipho Mantula. Advocate, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Simply Jambo Africa, even to the viewers, Habargani. Thank you.
It is indeed an absolute pleasure having you join us this evening, Advocate. On Tuesday, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, his opening remarks was the world needs to wake up. I mean, did you get a sense, just analyzing this summit in its entirety, that it is a united and a coherent summit?
Definitely, Simpiwe. This world has to wake up and at the same time consider the role of Africa. And if you look at the issues of equality, justice, reparation, even the presence of many African heads of state, the new faces, the new voices came forward, and they've engaged on several issues that I think this wake-up call is around this pandemic that the globe is facing, Africa is facing, and the issues of inequality. I think the key message that came from many African leaders in this this session, the 76th session, was around the what we call vaccine colonialism. They went deeper on it to try to explain how Africa must have the power to manufacture, distribute this vaccine, but even the issue of access to global health coverage, because I think the issue of health, simply we have looked beyond the health issues and we focus on this COVID-19, the issues of terrorism, conflict. I think when I looked at the three regional bodies, ECOWAS, AU, and SADC, they came out very clear. From SADC, simply the issue of cancellation of the debt, that's why many African countries are still struggling to come out of this COVID-19 situation. When you go to ECOWAS, Nana Kofu raised the issues around even the Africa's presence at the economic level, at the G20, notwithstanding South Africa and other countries that have been saying, even these permanent 5 members, the UN Security Council, we need to have the 2 seats of African countries. But when you look at the other regional body, which is the AU, Tshisekedi coming out very clear that Africa doesn't want charities anymore. Africa wants a win-win partnership. And I think that's where Tshisekedi even emphasized on issues of reparation, issues of climate change that has affected DRC Congo. You will remember that Nyiragongo erupted this year. There were many floods happening in the Horn of Africa. So these are the compounded, complex challenges that have faced the African continent. I think the missing point that we are still missing is that energies of Gaddafi, Robert Mugabe, where they were shaking the United Nations on some of the issues that they have not dealt with. And I think maybe the last part in short, simply quickly on women issues as we are talking about SDGs. I think the SDG number 5, empowerment of women in the African continent, must focus even on issues of peace, security, as well as social health care, because the role of women are critical in these aspects.
Now, Advocate, you mentioned the most important point, which is the cancellation of debt, for African countries. Do you get a sense that much focus was on the role that Africa should play on the international stage, the cancellation of debt first and foremost, and the infiltration of terrorist elements or the potential infiltration of terrorist elements in this, on this continent? I mean, do you get a sense that much focus was lavished on Africa and, the exploitation of Africa's mineral wealth, yet the continent remains the worst or the most poor?
Yeah. Simply it is said, because this was a meeting of different actors and even players. If you look at the global business community, when you look at the role of United Nations agencies, when you look at the member states bilaterals, because there were many sidelines. And if you look at the Peace and Security Council, as we were raising the last point, on Africa must not be the bed of terrorism. Africa must not be used. It must not be a transit of conflict zone. But when you look at the issues of Africa's debt again, it is a questioning of reparations as well, because I wanted to twist it to say that even when you look at the debt, some of the debts that Africa is still paying to the Western countries, they fail to deal with the issues of reparation. And I think South African representation on reparation was based on the issues not of the African descent only, but it focused even on reparation of slavery that Africa has went through and the neo-colonialism effects of the 1960 independence, because Africa never got independence. Africa went through dependency syndrome on the Western powers, and hence I raised ECOWAS' view, what came from Nana Kofu, saying that Africa has been on this aid wagon. Africa has been aided for many years, but we have not yet received what is due to us, and hence the issue of cancellation of debt. Hence I raised the issue of coming from Chakwera, from Malawi, representing SADC, came out very strong to say this debt simply becomes an obstacle. It now becomes a barrier of us to can confront and combat this pandemic called COVID-19.
And then when it comes to vaccine inequity, because some of the countries are still being accused of hoarding vaccines, for the benefit of those particular countries instead of sharing with those who are underprivileged. So did a solid solution come out of how the wealthier countries should distribute the vaccines equally?
If you look at President Ramaphosa on Thursday, when he raised the issues of the balancing of your 82% vis-a-vis only 2 to 3% of Africa having received vaccine. I've raised it earlier, simply, if you remember, on my point of departure, I said it's a vaccine colonialism, actually. We should move in from vaccine hoarding now, because the vaccine greediness and hoarding, we saw it from the first time when they were talking about vaccine. But I think Africa has to develop its knowledge system of how to can combat the future epidemics or pandemics, and not to be embroiled only with this vaccine thinking alone, because this vaccine again is to enrich Western countries, because what we see ourselves being only the belt of vaccinating, but not being the manufacturer of getting an African vaccine. Because I think the African leaders again, they find that they've never even looked back at what happened with the great flu of 1918 to 1921. What happened during the League of Nations during that time? We need to learn those lessons, that the vaccine hoarding or vaccine colonialism, when it enters the space of engagement at this high level, they should consider the ordinary people. They should consider the health system, infrastructure. And simply, Africa has been going through Ebola. Africa has been going through Marburg recently. Africa has been going through HIV/AIDS. And those are the key challenges that the vaccine hoarding has taught us, the lesson that the issue of saving the world is only saving the superpowers and the richer powers.
And then there's the China issue. How do you envisage that the United Nations should deal with China's influence on the world?
When the president presented, you'll understand that China was treated as the crime scene of COVID-19. And at the same time, being a crime scene of COVID-19, China has to rebuild its diplomatic stature and image. And at the same time, China has been raising the issue of its role in terms of economic infrastructure in most of the African countries. China has been talking about having developed Sinopharm. So one can see that China cannot be left out, because it is part of the UN Security Council. Remember when Elias spoke about these top 5 countries that were formed in the 1945 UN Security Council architect? China found itself still dominating this politics, and its tension with USA and its tension with Russia in many countries like your Guinea-Conakry. It's around the minerals. And one would look at bilaterals of many African countries with China that they are still embroiled with the Chinese debt.
All right, Advocate, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Asante sana Simpiwe, thank you.
Advocate Sipho Mantula there joining us live via Zoom.